1977, George Lucas formed a legacy.
The Force is with me, and I am with the Force.
Inspired by mythology, his saga has become a passion for many.
Feel the Force around you.
His legend has become our story.
It's true. All right.
One of resistance.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
Rebellion.
Rebellion is built on hope.
And redemption.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This is Star Wars Reactions.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the 74th edition of Star Wars Reactions. This is a special episode today. We got something fantastic planned for you, and we're going to tell you all about it. But first, let's get the introductions out of the way. My name is Aaron Harris. I'm one of your hosts here. And joining me today is the Thrawn to my Governor Price, the David Motters. David, brother, what's going on?
Hey, here, ready to react with a special podcast day episode that we've it's been in the works for a long time. So I'm really excited to do this, and just excited to be recording with you, doing an extra episode this week. And so I'm ready, and we'll get this show going.
Absolutely. I'm super excited for this episode. This, as you said, David, this one has been literally months in the making. I mean, you could even say we were talking about this last year.
That's right. That's right.
Granted, that was 2 months ago, but we were talking about it last year. And we figured this would be the perfect occasion to do that. As I said, this is a special episode. We are participating in Star Wars Podcast Day. This is a fantastic day. We celebrate with a bunch of our other friends around the podcast world. This is actually specifically held on February 7th each year. And we celebrate, we celebrate fandom in Star Wars podcast. This was started as a memory or a memoriam of the anniversary of the very first episode of Jedi Talk, which was actually the very first Star Wars podcast. It was released, of course, we're recording this, this will be released February 7th, 2022, which is actually the 23rd anniversary of that show, of the very first show. So we are honoring that along with 96 other Star Wars podcasts who are all coming together to release special content in memory, in celebration of, not in memory, it's not like it's dead, in celebration of Jedi Talk, and just in celebration of fandom altogether, because we have fun doing what we do, but we do it because y'all listen. I mean, we would still talk, but David and I would probably still talk Star Wars, but we probably just wouldn't record it if y'all weren't listening. So but yes, this is just a great day to celebrate fandom, celebrate Star Wars, and celebrate Jedi Talk for getting this medium going for Star Wars. This has been huge. There's so many shows out there now that you can listen to and celebrate different Star Wars and get different points of views and everything. And it's just a great family to be a part of. So we're here to celebrate that. And as David said, we're celebrating this with an episode that we have been discussing and actually has been requested online several times by several different people. So we figured this would be the perfect time to do this episode. And we're talking about the long-awaited Ronin Psychological Profile.
That's right.
That's right. We are going to break down Ronin. Of course, if you don't know who Ronin is, where have you been? No, just kidding. Ronin, of course, was a book that was released, but it was also part of the Star Wars Vision shorts that were released. Fantastic. Actually, it was one of my favorites that came out of Visions. That was one of them, but then a fantastic book. That was written as well. That just expanded on the character story. And of course, there was a lot of psychological issues through there. And something that I know I wanted to hear David's take on, and several of y'all wanted to as well. So we're going to give that to you today. So let's go ahead and get going. I do want to go ahead and throw this out. If you have not read the Ronin novel or not finished it yet, you may want to wait on listening to this episode. This is going to be chock full of spoilers to the book. Granted, it has been out for a while, so if you haven't finished it, get on the ball. But if you are joining us, let's get going. So here's just a brief biography of Ronan, which we pulled from various sources, including the book, Wikipedia, and everything. So the Ronin was the alias used by a male human, former Sith, who wandered the far edge of the Outer Rim territories in the aftermath of the Sith Rebellion. He would later be nicknamed as Grim. The Ronin had begun the rebellion as a Dark Lord of the Sith and led the Sith armies into battle after they broke away from the Jedi clans, seeking to control their own destinies and end a cycle of never-ending wars between rival feudal lords and their Jedi Knights. The lords formed alliances as they sent their Jedi to battle the Dark Lord, his witch, their forces, and the Sith demons that the witch resurrected after their deaths. However, the Dark Lord grew disenchanted with what the Sith became during the rebellion and turned on his followers, ending the rebellion. The Dark Lord renounced the Sith, shed his former identity, and became the Ronin. After the rebellion failed, the former rival lords led a revitalized empire that ruled much of the galaxy. Accompanied by his faithful astromech droid B556, the Ronin wandered through the Outer Rim as a self-imposed exile and did not speak about his past. Pledging allegiance to no clan, he made his life's mission to hunt and eliminate other Siths, collecting their kyber crystals to prevent them from causing any more evil. He was both guided and taunted by a disembodied voice in his head, whom he sometimes responded to aloud.
All right. Well, thank you for that. That helps set the stage, for this character. And, like as Aaron was saying, the book came out, it was easy for me to remember, it's my dad's birthday, October 12th. So like we said, it's been out October, November, December, January. We're now in February. So it's, again, spoiler warning, I'm going to go over a bunch of stuff. And so come back to this if you do not want to be spoiled. All right. And then definitely come back and listen to this. All right. So I just wanted Aaron to give a little background there to set the stage. And so, as Aaron also mentioned, several different people had mentioned that they'd wanted me to do a psychological profile when I'd gotten this book on Penguin Random House Audio and listened to it. I just really, really enjoyed it. And I knew that it would be a rich and fun psychology corner to do, right? The psychology corner here is the psychological profile of the Ronin. Speaking of that, I really have always enjoyed it when Star Wars and psychology come together. That's one reason I did, create the psychology corner, along with Aaron that you hear on a weekly basis. And so, again, I wanted to jump in and do this. And I do really want to give Brian Fennessy, he's at BMFen on Twitter. He had really encouraged me to do a psychological profile on the Ronin. And so let's dive into it and see what we can learn here. So if you think about this, there's two purposes of doing this psychological profile. One is to explore the psychological aspects of the Ronin. And always, and I've said this if you've listened to any of our previous podcast episodes, my professors always talked about making other people good psychologists. So I really hope as all of you listen to this, that in some way, shape, or form, you learn a little bit, you learn a lot, and ultimately add to your repertoire of being a good psychologist. I hope over the last couple of years of doing the psychology corner, forgive me, that people have become better psychologists along the way. Okay. Now, when Aaron and I were talking about this, as he said last year, back in the fall, one of the things that I was thinking about in my mind's eye is I didn't want this profile to become too unwieldy. So I decided to break it down into 4 main areas. Again, when we look at the psychological profile of the Ronin, one area you have to look at when it comes to the Ronin, his sense of self is because of trauma. The role that plays is critical. Okay. Number 2, I'm going to look at the development of self, especially looking at pain, disability. He has a prosthetic. We didn't learn that in Star Wars Visions. We didn't know that in that particular episode, but we learned that in the book by Emma Miko Candon. Okay. A third area I want to look at is loss, the role of loss in the development of his sense of self, and just for our listeners in general, the effects of that. And the fourth area I want to look at is the effects of being a queer character on how he sees the world. And I'll share a little bit later on that I needed to message Emma, the author, to get her insights on that. I really wanted her take on that, and so she responded really quickly and helped me to really kind of get my head around that aspect of his psychological profile and his development of self. Okay, so let's dive in. Again, 4 different areas. I'll keep reiterating that and trying to make it as clear as possible here. Okay, so I'd mentioned a minute ago that I'd listened to the novel on Penguin Random House Audio. And I knew in listening to that I wanted to talk about trauma first and foremost. I will say this, that Emma Candon on her Twitter account, this is a few months ago, she really eloquently discussed the psychological themes of trauma, recovery, and even persuasion versus emotional manipulation. I would highly encourage people to go back and take a look at that. Really quickly, Emma does have her master's degree in psychology. So she's just excellent, not just as an author, but in the thread that she wrote on all those psychological themes within the novel. She did invite other people to jump in and discuss the psychological aspects, and so I did jump in and I wrote a thread there, kind of piggybacking off Emma's, and I just kind of really riffed a lot on what Emma said in her thread, because she really got me thinking. Again, her being a psychologist in essence, myself as well. And so please go back and check that thread out. She does a great job of describing, different psychological themes, and particularly trauma. She does a great job of describing it. So let's do that kind of on that theme and the first aspect of his psychological profile. Some key points. First, people do fall through the cracks when it comes to diagnosing trauma via the DSM-5. Now, people who have listened to this podcast before know that I've talked about the DSM-5. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. All right, it's published by the American Psychiatric Association. Okay, and usually part of the reason why there's several reasons why people have fallen through the cracks, but I think one of the big reasons is that people have traditionally thought that only persons in war, right, are the ones to get PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But let me say this, over the years, and again, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, I've had the good fortune of working with men and women. Now, my Vietnam vets are all men. Almost all of them are gone. Not all, but a lot. But I've worked with a ton of men who fought in Vietnam. But then with Iraq and Afghanistan, I've mentioned this, I've worked with men and women who fought in both of those countries. And we've talked a lot, and I've learned a lot from them, and how, they've developed PTSD due to the traumatic experiences in those wars. Now, in contrast to that, I want people to know that a lot of my more recent therapy work has been with women who've been physically and sexually abused, not in war, but at home here in America. Okay. And so, again, making our listeners good psychologists, think about this, a key diagnostic point. And again, I'm trying to give background on trauma, and then we'll apply it to the Ronin here. Okay. So just bear with me here. But a key diagnostic point in the DSM-5 is that to be diagnosed with PTSD, the person, a couple different options. They can directly experience the traumatic event. Okay, that's like if Aaron and I are driving in a car, we see a horrific accident, we actually experience it and see the traumatic event, right? Or forgive me, actually, he and I in a bad car accident. Another one would be witnessing the event, right? If Aaron and I saw that horrific accident and we see it, we're a witness to it. The crash didn't happen to our vehicle, but to other people. Also, we can learn about a traumatic event happening to a close family member or friend. Now, you got to think about this. Instead of directly experiencing it or witnessing it, right, hearing about trauma can be traumatic. Right now, that's something for people to think about, and that's another reason why a lot of people aren't diagnosed, because they're like, well, I wasn't traumatized, I didn't experience it or even see it, but they hear about it. So, hearing about trauma, this is one way that people are not diagnosed with PTSD, right? And this is kind of like Emma stated, people can slip through the cracks, and unfortunately, so many people are suffering with PTSD and they're not diagnosed. Okay. Now, another little piece of data I wanted to share is that another way that persons are not diagnosed with a proper trauma diagnosis is when it comes to complex PTSD, all right? That or developmental trauma disorder, all right? Emma talked about complex PTSD in her thread, but let me just do this because I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail on this, but let me just point our listeners to the article. It's called this, Improved Treatment for Developmental Trauma. Now, this article can be found in the July-August 2021 edition of the Monitor on Psychology. Just so listeners know, it's one of two publications I get by being a member of the American Psychological Association. And if people follow, Aaron and I on Twitter, one of the things I always do is after Aaron posts about our new podcast episode, and he talks about the Star Wars Dad Joke of the Week in the Psychology Corner, I always like to respond. And also what I do is I put a little hashtag giving psychology away, but I also put typically, unless I forget, I put at APA_monitor. Okay, so people can follow that on Twitter. But if you go to the American Psychological Association, APA.org, you click around and you can find the Monitor on Psychology. You can see thousands of articles, psychological articles there. Just a little resource for people. But again, if you go there, you can read more about complex PTSD and developmental trauma disorder. It's not within the scope of the psychological profile, but I just want to point people in that direction. Now, let me come back to this as we move more towards how does trauma apply to Ronan. Let me say this. Emma Miko Cannon, the author of Ronin, right, the novel, she talks really well about how some people experience traumatic events and don't develop PTSD, right? So why is this? And she talks about it, mitigating factors, okay? These can include social supports like having good parents, loving aunts and uncles, supportive siblings, friends, teachers, or coaches. Now, and I've spoken about this, and Aaron knows this in some of the psychology corners, that I talk about the resiliency research, okay? And this has always fascinated me. It looks at children who have experienced traumatic events, but they turn out to be healthy, productive members of society, okay? What that resiliency research has shown is that they turn out okay because of the mitigating factors as noted before, okay? Like good parents, a good parent, or an aunt or uncle who steps in for the loss of a mom or a dad, okay? Things like that. Now, let's tie this into Star Wars and Ronan. Again, I set the stage for a lot of trauma stuff here, but let's tie it into Ronan and his profile. Now, here we go. When we think about Star Wars, we see young, force-sensitive children, right, taken by the Jedi. Right? And Aaron and I, in fact, were talking about this a bit in our last episode with Luke and Grogu and attachment. Okay, so check that episode out that we just released earlier this week, right? So think about this. In Star Wars, we see young, force-sensitive children taken by the Jedi. In Ronin, in the novel, we hear that not only Ronan, but another main character, Koru, and Ikea were all taken either by Jedi or Sith at a young age. Now, and again, I'm referencing back to something I've talked about many times. In the real world, okay, not Star Wars, not the space opera, being taken from a parent or caregiver is an incredibly traumatic event for any child, right? And again, listen to that previous episode. I do talk about attachment, how it develops in the first year of life, and so on and so forth. But that's much needed for a boy or a girl to attach to mom or dad, okay? Now, some of the resiliency research I've mentioned before has looked at the loss of a parent at a young age as a major risk factor. And again, this is kind of going back to it. The research then looks at what children thrive and succeed in life and those that struggle in life and have a lower quality of life. Now, when I think about Ronin, Koru, right, and Ikea, if you listen to the novel or read it, they have not only been traumatized by being taken from a parent or parents at a young age, they were also thrown into war. And what I wrote in my notes is holy traumatic double whammy Batman. All right, I'm referencing 1966 Batman here, but just horrific. I think that any of them, as you listen to the novel or read it, that any of them are even moving towards helping each other is amazing, right? I would be in the corner, just rocking myself, and just not even knowing what end is up. Okay, now this brings me to something that Emma has said. And you can see it again in her thread on Twitter. She said, trauma creeps into you, right? A trigger to your trauma can occur. Then you are, she calls it, unpersonal. And this got me thinking about dissociation and multiple personality disorder. Okay, and all this will tie into Ronan as well. Now, just a quick side note. In the DSM-5, multiple personality disorder is now dissociative identity disorder. Okay, now, let's just kind of set the stage and give our listeners kind of a visual here. And again, to make them a good psychologist, think about dissociation on a continuum. So what I want people to visualize is that on one end, there are normative brief lapses in time and space. So like if Aaron or I are driving someplace and you kind of doze off and you're kind of like, wait, where was I going? Oh yeah, that's right, I was going to that store. That is normative. That is a normative brief lapse in time, a slight bit of dissociation. On the other end of that continuum, if our listeners can visualize this, is dissociative identity disorder, and truly the fragmentation of the self into parts. Okay, now in the middle of that continuum, I want people to hear this and understand this, because I've had a few clients come in recently, women who have been traumatized, who are more along the lines of what I'm going to describe right now. Okay, not the full fragmentation of self into parts and having multiple personalities. Okay, but here's kind of two different ways to see the middle of this continuum. One is, and I've worked with persons who they remember an event, but they don't have the ability to connect any feelings to it. They'll just say to me, yeah, I remember it, and it should be emotionally laden, but at the time it's disconnected. It's a protective way. It's a protective process in that person, so they're not completely overwhelmed with emotions. But again, they have a memory of the event, but they can't connect any feeling states to it. Now, if you flip that, there are also persons, and I've worked with these persons as well, where they have no memory of an event, but they notice a bunch of different feelings. They're like, I don't even know where this comes from, but it is tied to that event or an event or events plural. Okay. Now, again, I'm not going to get into all the details of this, but a diagnosis of PTSD with dissociative symptoms would be warranted. Okay. So, for example, symptoms of dissociation can be depersonalization or feelings of derealization, just like Emma described, feeling unpersonal, right? When she said that, I immediately thought of that diagnosis. Okay. PTSD with dissociative symptoms. All right. Something to keep in mind, dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, it is rare, but PTSD is not rare. Okay. So again, many people would meet criteria for PTSD, but are undiagnosed. Now, this leads to the symptom I want to share with people in schizophrenia of hearing voices. Now, in Ronin, throughout the novel, we hear a voice talking to Ronan and one talking to Koru. All right. In the DSM-5, hearing voices is a hallucination. Now, keep in mind, hallucinations can occur in any person's sensory modality, but auditory hallucinations are the most common. I don't have this in the notes, but real quick side note, a few clients that I'm working with who hear these voices, hear them as distinct from themselves. It's not the internal dialogue that Aaron and I hear, or if you're a listener right now, you're like, well, I kind of hear, myself talk. That's you. When persons with schizophrenia say, no, this is a distinct voice, it's a different person or entity talking to me. Okay, so I want people to know that. Now, something to keep in mind, if the Ronin or Koru presented to Emma or me for therapy, and they described hearing voices as distinct from themselves, not just their own thoughts, we would probably diagnose them with schizophrenia. But again, we're not in the real world. We're in Star Wars, and the voices that they're hearing are there. They're, in essence, real, okay? Here's, again, spoiler, the Ronin is hearing his daughter's voice, and Koru is hearing the witch's voice. But again, they're truly hearing them. So it's not schizophrenia, okay? All right. Now, let me go back to Emma's thread and a question she posed. Again, thinking about trauma as we're going through this psychological profile. She asked the question, should the Ronin go to therapy? Right? I don't know if many people thought about this when they first sat down with Star Wars Visions in September and saw the Ronin in that incredibly awesome Visions episode, the first one that I watched. I don't know that many people were thinking about that. They were just trying to figure out, why does he have a red blade and why is he taking apart Sith, right? So, should the Ronin go to therapy? I agree with her that he should, but he wouldn't at the start of the book. By the end of the book, he would. Now, something to keep in mind, and again, making our listeners, good psychologists, Emma shares the brain will do a lot to keep a person out of therapy. I do want to share this because people need to hear this. One is that people tell themselves, I can bear it, right? Or they'll tell themselves, well, treatment isn't worth it. Or here's one that I love that she shared. We'll sit there and tell ourselves, you deserve the pain, right? Or a similar friend of that one, you haven't earned the right to relief, right? The brain can be full of landmines to mess with you to not come to therapy. I've told people not in therapy that my clients are tough. And when they ask me why, I tell them that it can be, excruciatingly difficult, in Emma's words, and I say the same thing, to decide to go to therapy and to accept therapy. Why else are they tough? My clients talk about the most difficult issues in the world, trauma issues, interpersonal conflict, being emotionally manipulated. And they are being vulnerable in the sessions. That's tough because they've been vulnerable before and it was abused. And so to come in and be vulnerable in the session is very difficult. All right. And of course, just piggybacking off of that, it's very difficult to be vulnerable in the sessions because that person does not want to be traumatized again. All right. So again, keep in mind, as I leave this first aspect of the Ronin's development, that he starts off life traumatized. All right. He is taken, as are some of the other main characters, and he's immediately thrown into war. And that's just like, again, I'm not even sure how you know what end is up. Okay. So first and foremost, he has been traumatized in the way that Emma writes it. Again, I could talk for hours, and she shares it in different aspects and different places within the book, the traumatization of the Ronin. Okay, so that clearly plays a role in his development. Okay, second, let's talk more specifically about the development of the self as seen in the Ronin. Now, I believe I've mentioned this before, but there is a book called Self-Esteem Revolutions in Children. Okay, this is by Dr. Thomas Phelan, a pretty famous psychologist who's written a lot of different books. This one was particularly interesting to me because I've talked to people a lot over the years about their sense of self and where does it come from. Dr. Thomas Phelan does a beautiful job of describing how there are three main variables that at least he sees in the development of the self. Those three variables are, do the listeners, does Aaron, do myself, did we get repeated? Is it repeated or not repeated? Positive or negative comments from important people. So very quickly, if Aaron and I get repeated positive comments from important people, aka parents, friends, teachers, a coach, if we participate in a sport, we tend to develop a higher self-esteem. If Aaron and I or any of our listeners get repeated negative comments from important people, we would tend to have a more negative sense of self. Okay. Now, there's, another variable, of course, actually ends up being multiple variables in the development of self, and it's the risk factors, right? Risk versus protective factors. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago the Resiliency Research, and it's pretty clear that one of the major risk factors in the development of self is being taken from parents. Now, Aaron and I were talking in our last episode, and of course we were talking about Cad Bane, and we see an episode where he's getting ready to take, I think it's a young Rodian child. He's posing as a Jedi, and Obi-Wan's trying to get there on time. And, in the world of the Jedi, they take these young Force-sensitive children, take them to the temple and train them to be Jedi. In this book, Emma doesn't really present it that way. She kind of turns the idea of Jedi and Sith on its ear, as well as this idea of being taken from families. Okay, so it lines up, these risk factors for Ronan line up more with the real world, as I've discussed, versus the world of Star Wars. So the risk factor for Ronan, two massive ones, are being taken from his family, as well as being thrown into war at a very young age. Okay, now, another aspect in the development of self, not just the repeated positive or negative comments, excuse me, from important people. Thank you. Take a drink of water here.
It's all good. All good.
Oh,
welcome to live podcast.
That's right. Here you go. So we talk about the three variables, risk factors, but there's also this, injuries. How do those affect our sense of self? Pain, disabilities, right? These all affect our sense of self. I've said this for years and years and years. Aaron and I have talked about this. I've talked to thousands of people. Just try to get through life as male, female, white, black, Hispanic. Person of faith, not a person of faith. Are you tall? Are you short? Are you rich? Are you poor? I don't care who you are as a human on this planet. Try to get through this life in its fairly decent way, and you're not dealing with an injury, you're not dealing with pain, you're not dealing with a disability. Let's say you're back it up. Let's say you're a fairly good student, you have some good social skills, people like you, you do have some decent parents, you go through a good school system, you're in a good marriage, maybe you've got some decent kids and so on. That's super hard. That's super hard. And I constantly think about how if you add a degree of difficulty to anybody, it makes life exponentially more difficult. So, when I think about moms and dads who have kids with disabilities, Just light mom and dad's hair on fire. I've said this before. You just have upped the ante on the difficulty level for that mom and dad and for that particular boy or girl, right? I work with a lot of clients in pain. With my retired clients, I've mentioned this and Aaron knows this. People have asked me, well, what's the most difficult stuff with people 50 and up compared to people 50 years of age and down? Well, the most difficult stuff I deal with is really, husbands and wives whose spouse is either their body or brain's breaking down. They're moving into dementia. Their brains are failing, their bodies are failing, or both. That is a massive issue. But probably number two, it's a bit less than that. I have more people dealing with spouses whose bodies or brains are breaking down. But the next big one, and it's just so difficult, is working with clients who are in pain. And what that does to your quality of life, your sense of self, I'm worthless, I don't want to be around anymore, I'm sick of pain. It really is a massive issue, okay? Injuries. I have clients, the big thing in my office, no falls. Horrible F word that starts with F, ends with a L, not with a K. FALL, no falls, none of that. But my clients who fall and are injured, you want to talk about changing their sense of self, their sense of self-worth. Oh my goodness, it's huge. Now, let me come back around to disabilities. Again, talking about all of this sense of self. Emma has a disability. She does acknowledge that. She did an interview with DNZ on Coffee with Kenobi back in the fall when the book came out. I noticed that she had a persistent cough the entire time. Now, I haven't specifically asked her what it is, but I wonder if that has something to do with it. I've talked extensively on previous podcasts about acceptance and commitment therapy and how that it's incredibly difficult to accept using a cane, a walker, wheelchair, glasses, hearing aids, and so on. Now, why do I bring that up here? Because this ties into the Ronin and his sense of self. We learn that he is shot in the face with a blaster. Again, we don't know this when we first see Star Wars Visions back in September of 2021. But he's shot in the face with a blaster. He's scarred, and he needed that prosthetic jaw to look, fairly normal. And so again, dealing with these things, like I said, I've got clients who are like, look, Dave, I don't want the cane. I don't want the walker, the wheelchair, glasses, hearing aids. I'm like, I know, I don't want them either. Aaron doesn't want them. Nobody listening to this is like, oh yeah, Dave Motters, yeah, sign me up. I want to use a walker now. I don't want to be able to walk properly. I need a walker. Oh, I need, hearing aids. No one wants any of this stuff. But Emma does a beautiful job of describing this, and really kind of when the Ronin is in a cold environment, or sometimes when he's just sitting in the back hatch or the back cargo bay of the Poor Crow, the ship owned by IKEA. I think his jaw just like aches and stuff. Again, pain will affect your life, your sense of self, and just being in a bad mood. So I wanted to kind of go through that, not just the repeated positive or negative comments from important people, not just risk factors, but I did want to talk about injuries, pain, disabilities, and tie that into the prosthetics and how this is a part of the Ronin, and psychologically he is scarred and his body is transformed, not just from all the wars, but from this particular interaction that he had that led to the prosthetic jaw. All right. Let's go to a third area that we need to look at in terms of the Ronin's psychological profile, and it's the role of loss. Okay. Now, I've talked before pretty extensively about the differences between bereavement and depression. Let me just quickly say here that bereavement, is considered typically, again, a normative process when we lose somebody. They're the pangs of grief. In a major depressive episode, it's a much different experience. There's feelings of worthlessness. Whereas in bereavement, it's not that you feel worthless, it's you miss your loved one, right? In depression, there are thoughts of suicidal ideation and not believing they should live. If a person is in bereavement, sometimes they'll think, I'd like to be dead, but it's not from a suicidal ideation standpoint. It's more, I'd rather be with my loved one that I don't have anymore. So that's just a few little quick differences between bereavement and depression, right? I want people to think about that. Again, when there's loss, you can be bereaved or you can be depressed. A big aspect of experiencing loss is, do you have social supports present or not? Again, risk factors versus protective factors. Back in November, I lost my dad, after having him in my life for 52 years. That would have been a much more difficult process without having a wonderful wife, 2 great kids, being able to record with Aaron, talk Star Wars, not just having Aaron as a great friend and Star Wars brother, but the social supports that I have here in the town I live in Ocala, Florida. Those really help. But when we think about the Ronin, he doesn't have those. He's torn from his family and he's thrown into more trauma, right? So think about that. Now, in the book, one of the things like I mentioned is you learn, and again, spoiler alert, the voice that he ends up hearing is that of his daughter, all right? This was a massive loss, the loss of a child. And I've talked about this before as well, that, and I just mentioned a minute ago, what are the challenges, with persons I've worked with 50 years of age and under? What are the greatest challenges with people 50 years of age and older? Well, something that spans both of these time periods, and I've worked with people, again, 50 and under and people 50 and above who have lost children. And it is bar none the most difficult work I've ever done over 30 years. And so the traumatization of losing a child is staggering. And the way that Emma writes this is just gut-wrenching as you read this. Now, keep in mind, and I was just looking at this in the novel before Aaron and I jumped on to record tonight, I was looking back at the loss that he has of, and you heard Aaron read it in the biography, his witch, his wife, his significant other, his lover, the person that, you get the history and background of what they were trying to accomplish together as a team, as a pair. And, he lost her as well. And so 2 massive losses of a significant other and of a daughter. And so this absolutely influences his psychological development. And then when we come to see him in visions, he's going around and basically saying, I don't want anybody to hurt anybody. So, you see that beautiful visual of him taking apart Koru's lightsaber and taking the red kyber crystal out and giving it to the young child in the village. If people remember seeing that, that is Koru's lightsaber. And so he, after going through so much hurt and so much pain and so much loss, he's going around trying to make sure that the Sith don't hurt anybody, right? Tried to stop the Jedi, now the Sith. Okay. So again, another key aspect, not just trauma, not just the aspects of, like I mentioned, the things we have to look at when someone's self is developing. But again, the third aspect is loss. Again, if you want to see Emma as an author and as a psychologist write very beautifully about this loss, check out this novel. Okay. Now, the fourth aspect of the psychological profile that I wanted to look at was how the Ronin's queerness helped influence his decisions regarding the Jedi and Sith. Now, again, and I talked to Aaron about this a bit, maybe a couple months ago. Emma, again, really bends your brain when it comes to the Jedi and Sith. She's not really presenting them exactly the way we know them within the Star Wars universe. So I needed her help with this. Emma is someone who is in that world. She is a queer author. I am not. So I need her insight on this. And she was more than willing and helpful in giving that to me. So I asked her for some guidance on, again, how, the Ronin, his queerness leads to some of the decisions he makes. And so she helped me to understand that his decision to not follow in the footsteps of the Jedi and Sith is really based in his profound sense of empathy for vulnerable people, right? And I just mentioned that a minute ago. Him, these senses of loss, but also, he has this profound sense of empathy for vulnerable people. He has a sense of empathy for people who are exploited. And that led to his decision to not do the same to other vulnerable people. Now, he's powerful enough to do that. So is the witch, right? But she helped me to understand that his queerness is not why he rebelled against the Jedi and then the Sith, as we see in Star Wars Visions. But it helped him to see outside the box, not like the Jedi or Sith, okay? And she helped me to also kind of get my brain around that his queerness aligns with that decision to not follow in their request for him to be in a position of power over other people. And that's something that he was dealing with as being such a powerful character. The Jedi and Sith both wanted him to be in a position of power over other people. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to exploit vulnerable people. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So there are 4 different aspects: trauma, the development of the self, loss, and the Ronin's queerness. Those 4 aspects. Now, there's more. I mean, we could do a more extensive psychological profile, but I knew that I wanted to look at least those 4 areas when it came to the Ronin's psychological profile. Now, speaking of more, to look at, I would say this, for further insights into the psychological aspects of the Ronin and other characters in the Ronin novel, definitely take a look at Emma Candon's Twitter account. It's at Emma Candon. There's also another one at Imithrax. Now let me spell that. IMMITHRAX. Imithrax riffed off of Emma's initial psychological kind of profile of Ronin, kind of the entire novel. She riffed off of it, and I did as well. And then off of those, I really wanted to develop this psychological profile. But definitely take a look at Emma Candon and at Imithrax, at those threads. If you scroll back, you'll see just really good insights on the psychology behind Ronin. Okay. So there it is. Pretty long-winded. Thank you for everyone for sticking with it and listening in. If you feel like I missed some stuff, let me know. If you liked it, let me know. And I think at this point, Aaron was going to say, well, David, where do people get a hold of you? And so let me just jump in and do it. Right, buddy?
Yeah. Just if they need to let you know you did miss something, how would they do that?
Yeah. So again, three different places. I just mentioned Twitter for Emma and Imithrax. Mine is at David_Motters. You can go back and take a look at my thread on that. And let's see. Oh yes, email. It is David at David at StarWarsReactions.com. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah.
David at StarWarsReactions.com. And then the third place is Instagram. And that's just simply looking up my name, David Motters. I guess I need to say Carabas, right, Aaron? I had a Carabas moment.
Hey, you know what? At least it was you having it this time and not me. Usually they're me.
That's it.
So, all right. Excellent job, David. Love it. And of course, you can always reach out to us on the show via the show social media as well. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest, all at the same at SW Reactions, or Twitter at SW Reactions Pod, or you can email us show at StarWarsReactions.com. Or if you just want to talk to me about the upcoming lame dad joke of the week, you can always find me on Twitter at TAHarris121079, or email me Aaron at StarWarsReactions.com as well. Wonderful job tonight, David. Great job. I know you've been working on this profile for a long time, my friend.
Oof. Well, and again, it could be longer and longer and longer. I mean, I've written, I've done psychological reports before, and sometimes they're anywhere from 10 to 15 pages if you want to do a really thorough job and you do personality testing, IQ testing, achievement testing. But I wanted to not to be unwieldy. That's why I kept it to 4 different aspects. And, I just want to say thank you to you, buddy, for encouraging me to do this. I think it was perfect for us to do it for the Star Wars Podcast Day, and hopefully people enjoy it.
Absolutely. I'm sure they will. So definitely reach out to David on social media. Let him know what you thought, and share your thoughts and opinions as well about the Ronin and his profile there. If we would, I know he would love to hear it. So, well, David, it's time to end it the same way we always do, my friend.
Let's do it.
All right. It's time for this week's Star Wars Dad Joke of the Week. Yes, I know this is a special episode and not our normal episode. So this is actually the Star Wars Dad Joke of the Week 1.0. 2.0 will be on our next episode, because you're getting 2 episodes this week, which means you get 2 jokes, aren't you? Don't you feel special?
So lucky.
So lucky. You're blessed beyond reason. So here we go, David. This week's Star Wars Dad Joke of the Week. Did you hear about the Gungan who became a taxi cab driver?
I did not.
Oh, his name was Car Binks. So with that, thank you everybody for tuning in. Y'all are awesome. We appreciate each and every one of you. Enjoy your Star Wars Podcast Day. Make sure you check out the many, many other shows who have put out something special today. Give them some love as well. We appreciate each and every one of you. We're praying for y'all. We wish y'all the best. Stay blessed. Remember, this is your place for elegant discussion for a more civilized age.
If you'd like to share your thoughts, you can email us at show@StarWarsReactions.com for our show notes and the latest news from the Star Wars universe. Visit our website at www.StarWarsReactions.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at SWReactionsPod or on Facebook at Star Wars Reactions. If you enjoy our show, please leave a review on iTunes. This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or by Lucasfilm Limited. It's intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars. All names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and the respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Star Wars Reactions unless otherwise indicated. Star Wars Reactions. Elegant discussion for a more civilized age.